In the Texas desert, a group of chained, enslaved black people trudges along on foot, overseen by the brothers Ace and Dickie Speck. It was 1858, 2 years before the Civil War, and among them was Django, separated from his wife Brumhilda von Schaft after they were forcibly parted during a sale. Later that night, their journey takes an unexpected turn when Dr. King Schultz, a former German dentist turned bounty hunter, stumbles upon them in the dark. His sudden approach sparks anger in Ace, who demands to know his intentions, threatening consequences if Schultz doesn't explain himself. In response, Schultz introduces himself as a tired traveler searching for 2 slave traders known as the Speck brothers. His real purpose, however, is to buy Django, who possesses information about 3 wanted men, the Brittle brothers. Schultz assumes the Speck brothers might have acquired Django at the Greenville auction. To identify Django, Schultz asks the group if anyone among them lived on the Caracan plantation. When Django answers, Schultz lifts his kerosene lamp, illuminating the faces of those in chains to confirm Django's identity.
What's your name?
Schultz then asks Django if he has any details about the Brittle brothers. Django provides their names, Big John, Ellis, and Roger, or Little Raj as they sometimes call him. He goes on to describe them as former overseers at the Caracan plantation. Schultz cuts him off, informing Django that the brothers no longer hold that role. He then asks if Django could still identify them. Before Django can answer, Ace intervenes, warning Schultz against speaking to Django in such a manner. Schultz remains calm, explaining that he's merely a buyer negotiating a transaction. Ace, however, refuses to sell Django and raises his gun in defiance when Schultz dismisses his orders. Schultz, unfazed, questions if Ace intends to intimidate or genuinely threaten him with the weapon. Left with no other choice, Schultz shoots Ace in the head and then aims at Dickie's horse, causing it to fall and pin Dickie beneath its weight. As Schultz approaches Dickie, he offers a mocking apology for harming his horse, cautioning him against acting impulsively before he's thought it through. Even as Dickie seethes in frustration, Schultz maintains a cool demeanor, urging him to keep quiet so he can resume his questioning of Django. Returning to Django, Schultz confirms Django's ability to identify the Brittle brothers, proposing a fair price in exchange. In the end, Schultz leaves the remaining enslaved black people with the opportunity to deal with Dickie themselves, while Django takes Ace's coat and mounts his horse to continue on their way. The next day, Django and Schultz reach Daughtry, Texas, and their arrival draws attention since Django is the first black man seen riding a horse in the town. They momentarily have the place to themselves as the innkeeper flees upon spotting Django with Schultz. Schultz then reveals his new line of work, bounty hunting, which, in his eyes, is trading corpses for cash instead of human lives. His role involves hunting down individuals, including enslaved people, delivering their bodies to the authorities for a reward. Though he despises slavery, Schultz tells Django he plans to twist the system to his advantage and enlists Django's help. In return, Schultz agrees that Django will get the chance to take down the Brittle brothers, securing both his freedom and a payment of $75. As they travel, Schultz discovers that Django is married. Django shares his intent to find his wife, Brumhilda, and purchase her freedom. He explains that Brumhilda was raised by a German family and learned some German, serving as a house slave for the von Schafts. With a plan to infiltrate the Tennessee plantation, Schultz suggests that Django adopt the role of a valet to blend in. Schultz gives Django free rein to choose his outfit for the role. They soon arrive at the plantation, owned by Spencer Big Daddy Bennett, where they intend to negotiate a purchase. Big Daddy agrees, and Schultz uses the moment to instruct one of Bennett's men to give Django a tour of the plantation. While Bettina is showing Django around the plantation, he asks if she's familiar with the Brittle brothers. She responds that she doesn't know them, and Django suspects they may be using different names. Fortunately, Bettina mentions the Schaefers, who arrived at Big Daddy's plantation some years ago. Unwittingly, she reveals that Ellis Brittle is out in the fields. She also points out that the 2 other Brittles are at the stable, disciplining a young boy, Jody, for accidentally breaking eggs. Django seizes the moment and heads to the stable, instructing Bettina to fetch Schultz. When he arrives, Django witnesses John Brittle whipping Jody, and without hesitation, he kills John. He then turns on little Raj, beating him before shooting him 5 times. When Schultz arrives, he asks Django to confirm the names of the 2 brothers he had just killed. Django informs him that Ellis is fleeing across the field, giving Schultz a clear shot to finish the job. Later that night, despite allowing Django and Schultz to leave after the killing of the Brittle brothers due to a warrant, Big Daddy gathers a posse to attack them. Schultz warns Big Daddy of the severe consequences for using deadly force against an officer of the court performing his duties, a crime punishable by hanging, but Big Daddy dismisses the warning. With no other option, Schultz sets up an ambush using explosives hidden in his cart, successfully targeting Big Daddy's carriage. Schultz then hands Django the rifle, allowing him to take the shot and eliminate Big Daddy. That evening, as they sit down to eat, Django opens up about his wife, prompting Schultz to share a bit about Broomhilda's background, lightening the mood with stories he knows. Recognizing his own sense of responsibility towards Django, Schultz admits that he can't let Django attempt to rescue Broomhilda on his own. He proposes an alternative. Django can join him in the bounty hunting business, working together through the winter. Django would receive 1/3 of the earnings from the bounties, which he could use to secure his wife's freedom once the snow melts. The next day, Django and Schultz return to Texas to take on their first job. Django swiftly takes down Smitty Bacall and, as a keepsake, holds on to Bacall's wanted notice. With this, he earns his first bounty and begins honing his shooting skills, even practicing with snowmen. Through the winter, Django and Schultz collect numerous rewards, dealing with various criminals effortlessly. When spring arrives, they travel to Mississippi, where they're struck by the sight of enslaved black people lining the streets. Eventually, they find out that Django's wife, Broomhilda, is now owned by Calvin J. Candy, the ruthless proprietor of Candyland, one of Mississippi's largest cotton plantations. To get close to Candy and devise a way to free Broomhilda, Schultz proposes a new approach. Instead of posing as horse traders, they'll pretend to be wealthy investors looking to buy into the Mandingo fighting scene, a brutal spectacle in which enslaved people are forced to fight to the death for entertainment. Schultz and Django craft a plan where Django will pose as a seasoned Mandingo expert from Germany, accompanied by Schultz as his sponsor. Soon, they secure a meeting with Candy at his private club, where Django can barely conceal his disgust at witnessing the savage fight. Schultz approaches Candy, making an offer of $12,000 for one of Candy's prized fighters as a ruse, hoping this negotiation will allow them to buy Broomhilda quietly. Their bold bid captures Candy's attention, and he invites them to Candyland. The next day, Django grows increasingly enraged at the mistreatment of enslaved people around them. Schultz tries to calm him, reminding Django to control his anger if he wants a chance to save his wife. As they travel, they come across a distressing scene. Calvin's trackers have cornered D'Artagnan, a Mandingo fighter attempting to escape, with vicious dogs ready to attack. D'Artagnan begs for mercy, pleading that he can no longer fight. Candy, however, remains unmoved. Frustrated with D'Artagnan's losses, Candy publicly humiliates him, lecturing him on the cost of failure. Schultz, disturbed by the situation, offers to compensate Candy, hoping to spare D'Artagnan, but Django stops him to avoid risking their cover. In response, Candy confronts Django, asking if he has any objection to what's about to happen. Django, restraining his emotions, watches as Candy gives the brutal order, allowing the dogs to attack D'Artagnan. Disturbed, Schultz is forced to watch as D'Artagnan is attacked by the dogs. With the ordeal over, they proceed to Candyland. When they arrive, Stefan, the head servant, is taken aback to see Django riding alongside Schultz on a horse. Calvin quickly explains that Django is a free man and instructs Stefan to treat him with respect. Later, Schultz asks Calvin for permission to have Broomhilda, Django's wife, cleaned up for a meeting. During this time, Django overhears details of her harsh treatment, making him nearly reach for his gun in anger, before reminding himself to stay calm and focused on securing her freedom. Helplessly, he watches as a tearful Broomhilda is brought out and readied. That evening, Calvin's sister, Lara Lee, escorts Broomhilda to Schultz's room for a private conversation. Schultz, knowing they could be overheard, speaks to Broomhilda in German to share the rescue plan. He reassures her of their intentions to free her. To carry out the ruse, Schultz plans to make an offer for Broomhilda as an escort under the pretense of a formal negotiation over dinner. During this meeting, A puzzled Broomhilda inquires about Schultz's friend, and at this moment, Django steps forward, revealing himself to her at last.
You silver-tongued.
Later that evening at dinner, Schultz is working to charm Calvin into accepting their deal when Stefan, Calvin's loyal and wary head servant, notices Broomhilda's reaction to Django. Broomhilda's startled look at a comment from Laura Lee tips Stefan off, making him realize that Django's true goal is not to buy a Mandingo fighter, but to rescue Broomhilda. Stefan brings this to Calvin's attention, exposing Django and Schultz's plan and turning the situation into a trap. Laura Lee unknowingly steps in to stop Calvin and Stefan's mocking of Broomhilda, which also helps Django control his anger. Calvin, noticing the tension, clears the room, leaving only Django, Schultz, and his lawyer to discuss the matter privately. Calvin confronts Schultz and Django about their intent to buy Broomhilda. He orders Stefan to bring her in and roughly handles her, grasping her neck to emphasize his control. With a sinister twist, Calvin changes the terms of the deal, demanding $12,000 for Broomhilda alone instead of the fighter, Eskimo Joe. Though Schultz is visibly reluctant, Calvin's threat to harm Broomhilda with a hammer if they don't comply forces Schultz's hand, and he hands over the money. With the payment settled, they wait tensely for Calvin to finalize the paperwork for Broomhilda's release. Finally, Schultz reaches his breaking point with Calvin's arrogance when Calvin demands a handshake as a condition for Broomhilda's safety. Furious, Schultz shoots Calvin, killing him on the spot. In response, Butch Pooch reacts instantly, fatally shooting Schultz. Django retaliates, taking down Pooch, Calvin's lawyer, and several other men in the room before being forced to surrender when Stefan and Billy crash capture Broomhilda, using her as a leverage against him. The next day, Django, now chained and restrained, faces brutal treatment at the hands of Billy Crash, who nearly castrates him. Stefan interrupts, announcing that Laura Lee has a different punishment in mind. Django will be sold to the LeQuint Dickey Mining Company, where he is intended to suffer a slow and punishing death. With Calvin gone, Laura Lee has assumed control of the plantation, sentencing Django to meet his grim fate. In the road to the mining company, Django devises an escape plan, convincing his efforts that he is a bounty hunter by showing them a handbill and claiming the men listed are back at Candyland. He promises a split of the reward money, and with the help of some of the other enslaved men, he gains their trust. Once freed, Django takes advantage of the situation, using the weapons provided by his guards to kill them and return to Candyland with dynamite in hand. Arriving back at the plantation, Django moves swiftly, first eliminating the trackers at their posts before retrieving Broomhilda's freedom papers from Schultz's body in the barn. Pausing for a moment, he says a silent farewell to Schultz, determined to avenge both him and D'Artagnan, who suffered at the hands of Calvin's cruelty. He then heads to the shelter where Broomhilda is held, seizing the chance to rescue her while the household is occupied with Calvin's funeral. Later that night, Django exacts his revenge on the remaining members of the household, including Laura, Billy Crash, and the last of Calvin's men who have just returned from the burial. He orders the surviving enslaved women to bid farewell to Laura, while Stephen, in shock, tries to confront Django as he leaves. With his mission complete, Django incapacitates Stephen, planting dynamite around the mansion. As Stephen's cries for mercy echo through the manor, Django ignites the fuse, destroying the house in a fiery explosion. Django and Broomhilda watch from a distance, then ride away together. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.